Hello and welcome to the Tough Girl Podcast, a 3-time award-winning show that aims to motivate and inspire you while increasing the amount of female role models in the media, especially in relation to adventure and physical challenges. I'm your host, Sarah Williams. If you're passionate about adventure, challenge and learning from women who have overcome obstacles and achieved remarkable things, then this is the podcast for you. Every Tuesday at 7 a.m, new episodes go live featuring incredible women who share their stories, insights and tips to help you achieve your dreams and goals. You can support the Tough Girl mission by signing up as a patron. Visit Patreon, patreon.com/Tough Girl Podcast. Keep listening until the very end as I share more information about what's going on with me with Tough Girl Challenges, give shout outs and recommend other Tough Girl Podcast episodes. More information can be found at toughgirlchallenges.com.
I'm Kerri Andrews. I'm a writer. I teach creative writing. I'm shortly, hopefully, to be moving into the charity sector for some sort of gainful employment whilst also carrying on with my writing. I'm based in the beautiful town of Peebles in the Scottish Borders, where it is a wonderfully sunny day today.
Since we last spoke, there has been a few changes. What's been going on since late 2020?
Well, we all had the fun of the pandemic, which has not yet ceased being fun. I had a baby in the middle of all of that, so I welcomed my daughter in 2021, and then last year I managed to get made redundant in the crisis that's about to engulf the higher education sector in our country. So I was perhaps one of the earlier ones, but there will be many, many more. So I've been working as a freelance writer since then, and trying to make a living teaching creative writing, which has been wonderful because teaching students was one of the things I really missed when I was made redundant. So it's been really good to keep my hand in with that. And it's been good to have time to focus on writing as well, because while Pathfinding is coming out, there's always the next one to start work on. So I've been doing that alongside too.
So having your daughter, your second child, being made redundant, I mean, God, I feel like I'm getting stressed, like just thinking about money and finances and trying to earn a living and, being a freelance writer while looking after, a newborn and your first child as well. Like how that just sounds quite stressful.
In some ways, I was lucky that I was made redundant until last summer. So my daughter was 2.5 when I was made redundant. So we got through the newborn phase while still having the protection of employment and maternity leave. So that was okay. And I was lucky in another way too, that the pandemic had the restrictions had at least eased, even if the pandemic hadn't necessarily so much, so that I wasn't in the dreadful circumstances that women earlier on had been, where they were giving birth alone or with significant restrictions on what they could do and where they could go. So I was able to have my partner in the room, and I was able to have a supportive. I had a doula as well for my second delivery. I had postnatal depression after my first child was born, and the charity that supported me through that offered a doula for my second delivery to try and help me have an easier transition into motherhood the second time. And I was very fortunate that restrictions had only just eased enough to make that possible. So I had a very supported birth. And although I did get postnatal depression again, it didn't last as long and it wasn't as bad because I was so well supported. So it was, of course, stressful because new parenthood is inherently stressful. And I seem to manage to do it in a very stressful way. So it definitely wasn't a relaxing period of time, but I was well supported, and I was very grateful and lucky to have that support available to me. And that's something that I wanted to write about in Pathfinding, was thinking about that transition into motherhood and how we handle that as a society, how a lot of that work gets outsourced to individual women, parenting in little silos, often completely alone, which is very, very bleak indeed. And that personal context really informed the work that Dan went on into the book.
We're going to be talking about the book, Pathfinding, on walking, motherhood and freedom. And I just sort of want to focus in on, I suppose, the motherhood at the moment. And, so you mentioned with your first child, you did suffer from postnatal depression. Having your second child and having already been through postnatal depression before, does that make it almost scarier because you think this could happen to me again? Or does it make it less scary thinking, well, I've already been through this once, so it can't be as bad the second time?
Bit of both. I was very frightened of losing myself again. the second time, which is what it felt like the first time. I just felt completely from who I thought I was before. And I really struggled to reconcile motherhood and my existence as a mother and the restrictions and the difficulties and the bodily nightmares that come sometimes with being a mother. I'd never experienced being touched out before I became a mother. And I found that since, even now I'm nearly 4 years postpartum with my second child, I'm still very much more sensitive to stimuli, noise, touch, smell than I was before I had children. So I still find bodily sensations quite overwhelming in a way that I wouldn't have recognized before I had children. So I was frightened of it. At the same time, I remember that the people who supported me the first time, a wonderful charity called Nurture the Borders, and I had the same women who supported me the first time with me the second time. And they were absolutely tremendous in giving me confidence. So that, it didn't matter what happened. I didn't need to worry about it, whether it happened or whether it didn't happen. I was going to have people there to support me, and I wasn't going to need to wait for that support. It was just going to be there. So that gave me confidence. I think if I hadn't have had that support, I don't think I would have been brave enough to go again and try for a second child. The fact that I then had postnatal depression, the ravages that pregnancy and delivery wreak on a body, and the fact that I managed to lose myself for a second time meant that there was, the fairy tale version of family that I'd had before I'd had children. And I thought, oh yes, 3 would be lovely, meant that there was no way on earth I was ever going to go a third time. But the second experience of postnatal depression was less bad. And I had perspective the second time that I didn't have the first, which is when I was in the throes of it, the first weeks and months of having a newborn. I didn't understand that it would ever change. I thought or felt that this was my life forever and it was utterly unbearable, both that existence and the thought that it would never change. Of course, because I'd been through parenthood once before, I knew that it did indeed change, that it did get better. I knew roughly when it would start to get better. So I wasn't trying to psych myself up to somehow cope with a life that looked like that. I was only trying to psych myself up to cope with a few months that looked like that. And that was much easier to do. So it was still difficult. It was still very distressing. And I still got to some very deep and scary places. But at least I recognized them. I knew the landscape. And I knew that my brain was lying to me as well. I didn't need to listen to the worst fears that my brain was coming out with. So all of that experience was helpful. So it wasn't easy. There's no way I'd ever describe either of my experiences of early motherhood as easy, but it wasn't as horrible the second time because I was just so well supported by some truly wonderful, magnificent women.
This is just so important to talk about because sometimes I feel as though, I don't have children. I'm not a mother. I have an amazing mum. It's like you hear about motherhood and childbirth and almost the movie perfect expectations of what it's going to be like and just almost like this perfection. And I think that the two words which are that I've sort of written down here are around identity and that losing yourself. Like it just sounds desolate and going through that, and when you have been lost, like how, and I hope this isn't too wishy-washy, but how do you find yourself again? You said you had amazing support around you. What sort of things were they helping you to do? Like, was it encouraging you to get outside? Was it encouraging you to talk about your feelings? What helped you to get back or to find your path out of it, to get back to yourself?
It was a combination of things. At the very beginning, so I was 3 months or so postpartum and really quite ill by this point. I had weekly visits with a perinatal mental health support worker who came, and for the first few weeks it felt like she just sat there and was sympathetic and kind, cried all over her. That was basically the thing for several weeks. I just sat there and sobbed for an hour. But we started to move past that a little bit, and she started to teach me some baby massage techniques. because one of the things that I was finding very distressing is that I hadn't had that feeling of bonding with my son that I'd expected. And I felt like I was going through the motions of motherhood rather than being his mother. And it's perhaps quite hard to describe to somebody else, but I didn't feel that overwhelming love which I'd expected. I liked him and I wanted to care for him, but it felt dutiful rather than innate. And I found that very disconcerting and disorienting. And one of the things that Julie, the woman who was helping me, was trying to do was help me bond and help me work through that. So this baby massage was helping us build that physical connection, which I really enjoyed. I liked doing things that I knew he was enjoying. Once we got through that acute phase, I was then partnered with someone they call them mum befrienders. So these are volunteers who give up a small amount of time every week, and you meet up. And we went for walks. She lived a few miles away from me, but down near Abbotsford, Sir Walter Scott's very beautiful home in the Borders, right on the River Tweed. Magnificent grounds, beautiful gardens, this fantastical, fairy tale house that he built. And the grounds are open for people to come and walk through. So that's where we would meet, really. We would go and have a walk through the woods, pushing the buggy. And I would be able to talk about what I was experiencing, what I was feeling. It was good to be outside. It was good to be with somebody else. It was good to be heard and held. And one of the things that I remember from both experiences of early motherhood was how desperately lonely I was. My partner went back to work quite quickly. He didn't really take that much time completely off work. He kept some of his work going from quite early on, and I experienced that as an abandonment. And then he went back. He was he's a university lecturer as well, and he went back to teaching, which is something he finds very intense. And he would come home. He would leave the house at 7:30, 8 in the morning, and come back at 6:30, 7 in the evening. And we were both sleep deprived, so he'd been out doing a day's work, sleep deprivation, and he would just fall asleep on the sofa, which is all understandable. But I'd been sat with a baby I didn't know what to do with, on my own, completely on my own, quite a lot of the time. And all I wanted to do was hand him over, and there was nobody there to hand him over to because he was asleep. And I felt completely alone in all of it. That wasn't necessarily the physical truth, but it's certainly how it felt. I felt enormous resentment that I was expected to know what to do with this child, and I hadn't got any more skills. I'd not been around young children. I didn't know what to do. They had to teach me how to change a nap, how to put a nappy on after he'd been born in the hospital. That was the first time I'd ever put a nappy on a person. And I felt like I was just left there in it all by myself. So the company of these other women was also important and necessary. So that, apart from anything else, was helpful. So that's sort of how they helped bring me back to myself. And then we started to do slightly longer walks, and I started to get back to work myself and started to research. And I was thinking about, and I've been working on an anthology about women's writing about walking, and it had exposed me to stuff I hadn't read before. And I was beginning to find some stories about women who'd walked in motherhood, and that was the beginnings of, okay, maybe this is something I'd like to pursue. So finding that was also helpful in finding my way back to myself. I know what to do in an archive. I know what to do with words. I didn't necessarily know what to do to make certainly my first child. And that was partly why I felt so completely at sea, that I hadn't got the skills and nobody taught me.
I love what's written on the back of your book. The desire to walk is something that defines us as human beings. Walking brings not only joy and connection, but freedom. The freedom to decide when and where to put one foot in front of the other. The freedom to rely solely on ourselves and our bodies. Why am I getting emotional? But what happens to this freedom when we become mothers? And I mean, so you're bringing these three topics together in Pathfinding: walking, motherhood, and freedom, and you're sort of entwining other stories in there as well, like from historical mother walkers. Had you already known about these women from sort of other research that you've been doing? How did the book sort of evolve?
I knew about some of them, but I didn't know about a lot of them. And if I had known about these women, I didn't necessarily think of them as walking mothers. And this was something that came up for me when I was preparing the anthology, Waymakers. I found myself coming across literature that I knew very, very well, like Frankenstein. I've taught Frankenstein to undergraduates for 10 years or more. And I'd never registered that A, it was written by, well, I knew it was written by a woman, but I'd never connected that wonderful final walk at the end of the book. Oh, hang on, that's a woman writing about walking. I'd not added two and two together, and that turned out to be quite true for quite a lot of people whose writing I'd been familiar with. I'd not put two and two together. So as a process of that, so I knew Ellen Wheaton because I'd written about her, but I'd not really written about her as a mother and what walking motherhood meant for her. So that was nice to come to her in a different way. And similarly, Dorothy Wordsworth, I've wrote about her in Wanderers, but not as a mother, and to discover all this beautiful co-mothering she was doing. So it was nice to see some familiar from a different angle. And then there were some other writers I thought about writing about for Wanderers that for various reasons didn't make it in. So Kate Chopin, I'd read her work early on, 2017, I was reading her and just couldn't quite make a chapter make sense, but she was fantastic as a mother. So it was nice to have some of that other material that had been rejected for Wanderers but find place here. But it had quite a messy genesis. I didn't really know what I was going to write for my next book. I didn't have an agent. I didn't have trappings of a writing career. I'd written one book that had done well, and I didn't really know what was next. And I was not feeling very confident. I had such a difficult time becoming a mother, and the mental health difficulties that brought. I'd had a difficult re-entry back to the workplace. I'd not been very well supported by my employer. It had been a long period of not feeling like I mattered. And then to try and generate a book out of that was not ideal at all. In fact, it wasn't really possible. So I bounced a few ideas around with a couple of people, which didn't necessarily do my confidence any good because nobody wanted to take it. So then I saw Sarah Rigby advertising book coaching on Twitter and thought, well, I need something. I need somebody to help figure out what I'm going to do next. So I signed up with Sarah and we agreed that what I was going to try and work on was to produce a submission. So a sample of material, outline, a complete submission for an agent, and helped knock what was a completely garbled, nonsensical mess into a piece that was polished enough that it could go out on submission to agents. And she helped me find the agents. So she match made me, became my agent, Kay Peddle. And that was an enormous boost of confidence. And then when Sarah took the book for Elliot and Thompson, that was another boost as well. So from that point on, Sarah, Kay and I were working reasonably collaboratively on that book. So I would produce a chapter and then Sarah would knock 70 Shades of Hell out of it. And that would be very bruising and distressing, but it was always beneficial and it always ended up better than it had been. So I had a lot of guidance and support there too. And, perhaps a pattern in my life over the last few years is having a really tough time and then meeting incredible women who help me pull myself up by my bootstraps, kick the backside when it's necessary, and help me step forwards more confident and in a better shape than I was before. So Kay and Sarah, another pair of women who have done so much to boost my confidence, to make me feel like I could write this book, help me walk the line between personal and these other stories that have been interwoven. One bit of the personal, very much, and it wasn't this sort of personal, potentially very exposing and making me vulnerable. And Sarah and Kay both really helped guide where that balance should be, and have been very protective in a way that's not. It's recognisably motherly, and perhaps I needed a little bit of mothering. And I think every new mother probably needs mothering herself at that particular moment. And while I got that a little bit from my own mother, no one could have done it on their own. And certainly I could have done with a great deal more support. So I was really lucky to have various mothers swing in and help, which is why I dedicated the book to my mothers, because there were a number of women biologically connected to me and not, who supported me in ways that were absolutely essential to the creation, the completion, the publication of Pathfinding. And it wouldn't exist without those mothers.
You talked about confidence and the words that sort of shattered my heart is and I would never want anyone to feel like this is, but when you said like not feeling like I mattered, and how are you feeling at the moment? How are your confidence levels, with your new book, which you've put so much blood, sweat, tears, everything in to get it published? Like, have your feelings changed? Like, has your confidence grown?
I think for most people, confidence is a shifting variable. It ebbs and it flows. What I didn't know when I published Wanderers was how vulnerable publishing a book feels. And I was really lucky that my editor at the time was perfectly capable of dealing with a needy writer who was suddenly going, oh God, what if people hate this? So there will, I have no doubt, be some oh God, as Pathfinding launches into the world, not helped by the fact that I was made redundant last year, which was perhaps the most bleak expression of we don't want you, thank you very much, go away now, that I've ever had. So that didn't do my confidence any good whatsoever. But I've been really touched by the early readers of Pathfinding, some of whom have provided quotes that we've used on the cover, who have said really, really lovely things. Now, whether my editor has hidden away any that came back that didn't say really lovely things, I don't know, because all the ones I've seen have been really, really lovely. And that's been really heartening, not least because a couple of them have commented on the crafting of the book. And that was an area that I really felt like I struggled with, was how to write in this mode, in this more personal way. So to have that pointed out as something that they've liked, that's meant a great deal to me. So that's all been a big boost. There's a few other things that will be coming down the pipeline later in the year that I've just found out about. So that's all lovely. And I interviewed for a job last week and they've offered me the job. So while it's not official yet because there's no contract signed, so I'm not going to say what it is, but it's a job that I feel like I could make a big difference in. And to be wanted again in a sort of employment context has been great as well. So little by little, I've been trying to piece my confidence back together, and having a book coming out when it looks as gorgeous as Pathfinding looks, and I should be getting my author copies later today, I've been told. So I've no doubt I'll become 5-year-old as I open the box, like Christmas time. But having that and seeing the seriousness and the care that other people have taken over it, that there's a beautiful map in there. The end papers are gorgeous. The cover is divine. The editing, the meticulous copy editing that went in, which caught more than the hours. Yet the fact that these people who are incredibly gifted and so talented, and they've used those gifts and those talents to help make this book the best it can be, that's also a massive fillip. And that, okay, yeah, maybe I can take myself seriously. Maybe I can think of myself better than perhaps I have been over the last several months. It's not been the easiest while. So it has been really nice to be able to, even if I can't believe it myself, to fall back on other people and their support and their confidence in me and in my work. So it's still ebbing and flowing. I don't think I'll ever be sitting there going, oh yes, I feel completely confident. Yes, I'm great. Self-doubt is definitely more my speed than overconfidence. But I feel like I'm heading towards a reasonable equilibrium where I've got good balance between, I'm actually all right at this stuff, but also the appropriate amount of humility. None of this happens without an extraordinary team behind you. So hopefully a bit more balance for the next while.
You talked about the crafting of the book, and it's been written in chapters, and the chapter titles are Body, Mind, Anger, Self, Ambition, and Hope. With the chapters structured in that way, what was the reason behind that?
I wanted to focus each chapter on an element of motherhood that I felt was really important. and starting with the physical changes, which I'd known very little about. I mean, I understood the basic biology of pregnancy. I mean, I'd been to sex ed class at school, so I knew the birds and the bees part of it, but I didn't have any idea how strange it would all feel and how alienating. And maybe that's where this sense of losing myself began, because all of a sudden my body was alien. It did have an alien in it, an entity that was not me. And all of that was very dislocating and strange. And that played into then questions of what happens to our minds, that our brains are literally being rewritten by the hormones of motherhood. Bits of our brain are shrunk, other bits of the brain get enlarged. We are not the same people afterwards as we were before. Very fundamentally, physiologically, we are not. So a lot of the chapter titles were quite self-oriented and self-focused, because these are the things that I needed to think through. I needed to work out, okay, well, who am I now? And the anger which came after my second pregnancy and my second experience of postnatal was not characterized in the same way. It wasn't sitting around having awful fantasies about what I might do, which was the first time through. The second time, I was absolutely raging. I was furious. And it led me to behave in ways that were completely unacceptable. And I wanted to understand where that had come from, whether I was on my own in feeling like that. And if I wasn't alone, then what had other people done? And that was kind of the root of all the chapters. Am I completely insane in having felt that or experienced that or thought that? Then looking for others. And some of those others were people I went on walks with who were wonderful. And I learned a great deal from every person I went walking with. And a lot I learned from people who've mothered in the past, how they felt and navigated these challenges. So I wanted to give a particular aspect real attention. And some of those aspects are the ones that don't get talked about. Maternal anger, for instance. Once you start thinking about what we do to mothers, it's not a question of why are women so angry, it's how do they manage to control it? You get a baby, like I did, I've literally that day put a nappy on it, and you get sent home. In my case, I'd had a second degree tear in my perineum, so I'd got stitches between my vulva and my anus. They were really sore. I'd been up all night delivering this baby. Then I'd had a sleep night on the ward where I'd been left alone with my baby. I'd had midwives who were insistent that breastfeeding was all that was possible, physically milking me in ways that were physically agonizing. Treatment that you would never tolerate anywhere else, in any other setting, in any other circumstance. And that was just the start. Then I get sent home with a partner who is equally clueless, who has got no experience either. We're both making it up, and we're responsible for this entire other human being. We're 300 miles away from the nearest family members. We don't know enough to have brought in support. We've got to do all the things that adults have to do to keep a house ticking over. And then this whole set of skills that we've got no clue about. And by the way, do it on no sleep. I was hallucinating by day 3. And that's motherhood. Welcome to motherhood. Good luck with that. Can you imagine going into a job? I'm getting angry now just remembering it. You imagine going into any other circumstance in life where the stakes are so high, where the training is so inadequate, where the treatment before you're left alone to sort it all out is so abysmal. And we wonder why people don't keel over, why women don't keel over at greater rates. It's extraordinary. And other cultures, other societies, and elements of our society do a much better job of recognizing this transition and preparing for it and supporting women through it. And looking back at the historical documents, reading about the 17th and 18th centuries, all these community traditions. Now, don't get me wrong, I would not want to be delivering a baby in the 18th century with no access to modern medicine and obstetrics. I absolutely do not. I'm not hankering back to that at all. I loved both of my epidurals. I was deeply grateful for all the drugs that I could possibly get. But in terms of the community coming together and recognizing this is a major life stage, like all the 18th birthday parties we have, this too is a major life stage and requires marketing. It requires community cohesion. And there would be, people would be sharing equipment. You'd be sharing the cots, sharing the linen. The linen would have been used by the baby that you helped deliver last year. Now it's your turn to have it for your baby. and the woman helping you deliver is the one that you helped last year. And there's all this reciprocity and trust and communal memory, and you're going through a ritual that is being practiced over and over again, and the sounds of it are familiar, the smells of it are familiar, the touch of it is familiar. You've handled all of these objects before. They're the ones that you gave to these women in the past. And after all of that has happened, these women hang out and help you. And, you don't have to get up and run a household whilst, the modern equivalent having major abdominal surgery. You've had an emergency cesarean or a cesarean because that was what your choice was, and that's a valid choice. And then we expect women to get up and breastfeed and tend to a baby and get up in the night. They've had major abdominal surgery. And none of that was contemplated. And you'd have had this community around you trying to support you and allowing you to rest, allowing your body to heal. And I remember feeling quite tearful reading those accounts and thinking what that might have felt like and how that might have looked and how much better I would have been able to mother my own child if I had had that care for me. And I guess that's where, we come back to this. I didn't feel like I mattered because the whole hospital process, the whole pregnancy process prioritizes the fetus. It prioritizes the baby. And, you just become mum. I've slapped down every person who's called me mum and said, well, my name is Kerri, thank you very much. But you would not believe the number of people that start off calling you mum, because that's all you are. You are just the vessel that brought this thing into the world. So anger for me, the second time, I didn't know I was going to feel that. I was very surprised by it and I was deeply disturbed by it, especially after my behaviour became so erratic and so incredibly poor. And I really wanted to understand how that had come to be. And the other chapter titles as well was, ambition. That's not something we usually allow mothers to have, but it was absolutely essential to my feeling of I've got to get back to myself. And the self I remember is ambitious. Whether that's climbing things or walking distances or writing or teaching, I want to achieve. How do I do that now? And the amount of unpleasant responses to women who've expressed ambition after having babies was really disturbing. It was illuminating and disturbing. It's like misogyny only squared or on steroids or something. But I didn't really want to end with those two slightly bleak topics, well, incredibly bleak in some ways. And it didn't feel like that was where my own journey was going to end either. So that's why it felt to me like hope had to be the last chapter, because we have to hope that we can do this better. I want to hope that in talking about my experiences and having researched all these amazing women, that I can hope that I can help make it a little bit better for women who come after me. I don't want people to be so overwhelmed or frightened or surprised or confused by these enormous feelings, this sense of injustice. It is unjust what happens to women when they have children. We are right to be angry about that. And there are so many ways in which our society contains that anger or neutralizes that anger so that it can never achieve anything. And there were some really illuminating examples in the books and the writers that I was looking at for ways in which we could perhaps harness that anger, harness that ambition, and build towards something we could all hope might be better than what we've experienced ourselves. So that's why the chapters were structured as they were. The first three, the order of those changed a little bit, but the final three, the order of those was really clear to me from very early on, that it was important to address those three things. And it was really important for me to end on hope, because I was hopeful that it could and should be better.
How's your walking at the moment? Are you managing to go out either by yourself to have some solo time out in the mountains, out in nature, or are you sort of not necessarily ready for that? You're wanting to either do it with your children, your family, or to walk with friends, or is it a bit more of a balance between sort of all three?
It's a mixture at the moment. Part of the reason I wanted to write about body is because of the physical changes that, it's not just about giving birth, it's what happens after it. Pelvis is nowhere near as bad as it was when I was carrying my babies, but it's not right. The coccyx that was dislocated by my son as he was born was put back broadly where it should be, but it's still right. My hips still don't quite work the way they should. my feet have spread, so my shoes don't fit properly, which means I now get blisters. I can't wear my walking boots the way I used to. So I've had to find alternatives. Those alternatives are giving me blisters. So there's a physical element of long lasting consequence that I'm still grappling with. And that's knocked my confidence as a walker. So I went for the longest walk I've been on for a little while, a couple of weeks ago, and it gave me a giant blister where I'd never had a blister before. And that blister got infected. And whilst I got back from the walk, going, that was amazing. Oh, yes, that blister really hurts, but it was definitely worth it. By the time this infection had got hold and it was burning agony, I think, was it really worth it? A proper bluebird day, but that amount of pain was really quite significant. So I find it quite difficult. I'm not as fit as I was. I've put on weight. I find it hard to go uphill. Those are things that have changed. But I've just been off to Kilmartin Glen in Argyll for a couple of days of research, actually, for my next book. And I spent the first day mooching about the valley, doing 4 or 5 miles. And it was really enjoyable. My body felt good. And that's not something I take for granted anymore. My body felt good. And even when I had to wade through, I had a choice between getting my feet wet in a bog with clumps of reeds and possibly falling in and or breaking my ankle, or I could walk through a lake over a track and I would still get my feet wet. I would definitely get my feet wet, but I wouldn't fall in and die. So I went for the lake and got absolutely soaked. But that was kind of funny in a way that it hasn't always been. And that was really nice. And then yesterday I went up Dunnad. It's an amazing hill fort. Not a big hill, it's no less than 80 metres, I'd say. But it's straight up from sea level pretty much. And it was steep and it was tricky. But it was really enjoyable. So that's been really great, is having some more positive experiences. And I didn't get any blisters either. But I also walk with my children, and that's different, but that's also fun in its way. But I keep looking at the hills thinking, I really want to get back up there. So I'm going to have to work up the confidence to do that. That's me, the next thing. And it's all sort of coming to terms with a body that will never be the same again. I've got to learn to live with this body. I've got to get to know it and accept it the way it is, I think.
Tell us about your next book. What are you researching?
I've been researching a book about the history of walking in Scotland, which is a bigger topic than perhaps I reckoned with, but which is proving really fascinating. So the history of walking goes back roughly 10,000 years when we're talking about the first people coming into Scotland. So I was in Kilmartin Glen because it's the site of one of the densest areas of Neolithic and prehistoric sites, remains, objects, burials, stone circles anywhere in Britain. You literally cannot walk more than a quarter of a mile before falling over something. So I was walking, I built this walk around, trying to link as many of these sites as I could. And I'd been to Kilmartin a couple of times, but never really taken the time to properly explore it. So that was really, really nice. And what I was trying to do was understand how people would have used this landscape, because they were using it as a ritual space. And the understanding is that people would have walked into this landscape and experienced it as a sacred site. So I was trying to walk around it and figure out how you might do that, because I'd like to be able to describe how people might do that. So it was really fun. It was really fun. So it's a glacial valley, and you can see all the tumulus and all the the mess that the glacier left behind. But you can also get these glacial shelves. And Kilmartin Village sits on one of them at the end, at the sort of the head of the valley. But there's these shelves that run down the side of the valley, and you don't, like Dunnad, you don't have to get very high because the ground is so flat. This isn't the great moss. You don't have to get very high to get quite a good view. So that was fun playing around with what you could see from where. So that was what I was doing. I was sort of using my body to try and figure out how people might have understood this landscape 4,000 or 5,000 years ago. And while I was at it, I went up Dunnad and put my foot into the footstep in the inauguration stone where the kings of Scotland were made 1,500 years ago. So I had the fort to myself as well. So I felt like the Queen of Scotland stood on top of the citadel, looking over towards Jura. It was absolutely magical up there. That was a great walk. It was good for my brain, but it was also good for my confidence as a walk as well. Felt like I was where I belonged, which hasn't always been the case.
Oh, incredible feelings to have. You're also the co-director of the Women in the Hills network. Do you want to share a little bit more about that network and what it does and who can get involved with it?
Its funding ran out, so that network is no longer live. And we must have been the most unlucky group of people ever, because 3 months after we launched it, and it was launched with, we got great project partners, we got the most perfect people to work with. But 3 months after we launched it, everything locked down. And then we had between us, the three of us on the project, we had pretty much every major life event you can imagine, the good and the bad, hit us in sequence, so that I don't think we went more than 4 or 5 months between calamities. And that really limited the work that we could do for various reasons. But what we did complete, and this was where I ended up writing about in chapter 5, because this is why I was in Glencoe. We'd said at the beginning of the project that we were going to organise an event to enable women who don't ordinarily get access to the landscape. We were thinking of people who had childcare responsibilities, people who were perhaps less well off, people who came from backgrounds that you don't often see in the hills. Thinking of people from black and ethnic minorities, anybody who wouldn't ordinarily get the chance. We wanted to support them because the project's whole reason for existing was to understand better the barriers that exist for women in accessing upland landscapes. And from our personal experience, two of us were mothers then, all three of us are mothers now. We knew that it was harder for women to get into the hills once they became mothers because they take on a disproportionate amount of the domestic responsibilities. Men are much freer to go off when they please. Their bodies are less impacted. Well, they're not impacted at all. You wouldn't be able to tell a father from his body compared to any other man, whereas you could probably tell a mother's body. If you looked at the skin, you'd see the silvering of the stretch marks, or you could perhaps see the altered gait where her pelvis has been damaged. There are signs that don't exist for men, and we wanted to understand how all that came to play. The fact that women's bodies are not catered for in outdoor clothing, the distance and the steps, on these made paths, have they taken in women's gaits, or are they built around the average men's stride, which is going to be quite different. So we really wanted to understand how all of those factors came to play out in women's access to the uplands. We didn't get to do as much investigation into those areas as we'd liked, but I wanted to make sure that we did the event that we'd planned for the end of the project, which was to have this residential weekend. And even that got hit by a calamity because we were supposed to do it in the September, and I got seriously ill with a major infection and ended up in hospital the week before. And the woman who was supposed to be running it in my absence, because I'd just moved house as well, that was the thing that had happened just before I'd just moved house. And whilst I was moving house, the other woman had an emergency cesarean and was in hospital. And you couldn't write it. You just couldn't have made it up. So we ended up having to postpone it to the following March. So by the time we got there, I was driving up to Glencoe expecting to crash the car or something, because this was a cursed project, it felt. But it turned out to be a really wonderful weekend. We were supported by Girls on Hills, who are an amazing company who do an awful lot to support and empower women, whatever the level of expertise. If you're an experienced trail runner, they've got you covered. If you're a beginner looking to get into the Munros, they'll help you too. And they provided the guiding. So we got professional guides, and they helped organise the accommodation, all the logistics. And my responsibility was recruiting the women. And we got this amazing group of people together, and watching the friendships blossom over the fire, over dinner, and then going for these walks on the Saturday and the Sunday. So one group went up the Devil's Staircase, and the other group, which I accidentally joined, went up Buccleuch Beg. And then on the Sunday, we all went up the Lost Valley in Glencoe. That was just extraordinary. So that was the work of the project. I wish we could have done more. We had absolutely intended to do more. There is more to be done. And I know I've talked with one of the other women about potentially building a project on top of that. So if anyone's got any bright ideas or energy, we're absolutely delighted to hear from them, because there is a great deal more work to do.
And Kerri, how can people connect with you? How can they follow along with your work? Where are you active on social media?
I'm active-ish on Twitter/X, though increasingly moving across to where the skies are blue, where there are fewer Nazis.
Yeah.
Blue,
Hear you.
blue sky is where I'm mostly present. So come on over. It is beautiful over there. I'm on Threads, sort of, but I've also got an author website. And if you can't find me any other way, you can always use my contact form that comes straight through to my email. So that's an easy way of getting hold of me as well. And hopefully that's easily searchable. kerriandrews.co.uk is that web address. But yes, feel free to come find me on Blue Sky. People there are nice.
Fantastic. Kerri, I'll make sure that I share all of the links to your social media so that people can connect, follow along, buy your book, support the incredible work that you're doing, and read more about walking, motherhood, and freedom. And I would love for you to have the final words of advice and wisdom, especially for women, for mothers who do want to get back out walking again, who want to get their freedom back. What advice would you like to share with them? But please don't say just do it. Any other advice apart from that, and you can take that in any direction that you'd like.
Yeah, just do it. It's not going to cut it, is it? I think be kind to yourself would be the first thing. I certainly put a lot of pressure on myself to be a particular way, partly because I couldn't understand how it ended up being that way. And that wasn't necessarily very helpful. So being kind to yourself and being accepting, if you can, of your body, which has done its very best and is still doing its very best. That's something that I really needed to take on and didn't to start with. And I would hope that other people would do a better job of being kind to themselves. But it's also, don't let go of your dreams. Don't let go of your ambitions. Hold on to them. They are valid. They matter. Go pursue them. And while the society that we live in is absolutely not geared up to support women in anything like a remotely adequate way, there are women out there who are incredible, and it is possible to find them. So try to find your tribe. I was so lucky to do that. I've met so many wonderful women through the various things that I've done. And, getting in touch with Girls on Hills would not be a bad idea, because their experience, a number of them are mothers and have trained since becoming mothers. And there is increasing understanding in how to train to a higher level than perhaps has been allowed in the past whilst being a mother. So be kind, be patient, but don't stop hoping, don't stop dreaming, don't stop reaching for what makes you happy, because you matter.
You do matter. Kerri Andrews, thank you so much for coming back on the Tough Girl podcast. Thank you so much for catching us up with what's been going on for the past 2 years. Massive congratulations on your latest book, Pathfinding, on walking, motherhood and freedom. And just thank you for sharing your passion and your knowledge. I'm getting emotional, but it's been so amazing to speak to you.
Oh, thank you so much, Sarah. It's been a pleasure. Thanks for having me on.
Hey, tribe. I really hope you enjoyed the episode with Dr. Kerri Andrews. One of the things I just loved about Kerri is how she's just shared in just such an open and honest and raw way about the challenges of motherhood. And a big shout out to all of you who have been on that journey yourselves, or currently going through that, or are currently expecting. Honestly, I'm just in awe of each and every one of you. So we have actually spoken with Dr. Kerri before, so you can go and listen to that episode. It came out on the 5th of November 2020, and she shares more about her first book, Wanderers. Well worth listening to. If you are looking for more resources, so if you are a new mum or you're currently pregnant at this moment in time and you're wondering, how am I going to combine motherhood and adventure and challenges? What have other women done before me? Then I've counted this up now, that I've got over 100 episodes where I've spoken with other women who've shared more about their motherhood journeys, who've shared more about how they balance childcare, children with adventures, with training. It's not just mothers, it's also grandmothers that we've spoken to, a whole variety of different women, all ages at different stages. Well worth listening to. So if you go to toughgirlchallenges.com, go to the resources section, there is a mothers and a pregnancy page. Now, if you are also currently trying to get pregnant and you're going through the IVF journey at the moment and you are struggling with that and it's not happening, then I'd recommend listening to Jessica Hepburn. She shared more about her experience of not being able to have children and going through IVF, and and have it not be successful, and how her life has taken a different direction. She's now what she calls herself an unlikely Everest summiteer, and she's inspiring people to live big and brave when life doesn't go to plan. She is author of an incredible book called Save Me from the Waves. She's also swam the English Channel. Really, really great speaker, and I'd highly recommend that you go and give her a listen. I am active on Instagram at Tough Girl Challenges, so come and follow along, see what I'm up to at the moment. I'm very consistent. All I will be doing in March is working, editing podcasts, going to the gym, trying to eat enough protein every meal, which is harder than you think, doing all my recovery, trying to get my sleep in. There is no new vlogs coming out. So the vlogs from Tiara Trail have all finished now, but I hope you enjoyed watching that series, and I hope I managed to bring you along on that journey with me of walking 3,000 kilometers from Cape Reinga all the way to Bluff. The next set of vlogs that will be coming out, the next set of adventure vlogs that will be coming out will be on the Southwest Coast Path. I just haven't been able to prioritize that and move that to the front of the queue because I'm catching up with podcast episodes at the moment, but hopefully in the next couple of weeks I'll be able to get started on that series of vlogs. So I was out on the Southwest Coast Path for 40 days. It was an amazing experience, like one of the best trails that I have walked. So I'd highly, highly recommend it. What else do I need to say? Big shout out to all the incredible patrons. Thank you so much for your financial support every single month. It makes the world of difference knowing that you're out there, whether it's £2, $2 a month. If you're in a financially stable position, you can afford to support me more. I really do appreciate it. It allows me to fund the running costs of the website and the hosting costs for the podcast. We are aiming to get to 800 episodes by the 4th of August. The 4th of August 2025 will be the 10th year. 10 years of the Tough Girl podcast. Wow, I have been very consistent, but it's a passion, it's a love, and I haven't really talked about I presume I talk about the mission. I presume I talk about this all the time, but maybe I don't. But I think you probably know because I do mention it at the beginning of every episode, but you might skip the start. But the mission of Tough Girl Challenges is to increase the amount of female role models in the media, especially in relation to adventure and physical challenges. And how I'm doing that is by interviewing women and sharing their stories on the Tough Girl podcast. And I'd love for you to listen to them. I'd love for you to tell one friend about the Tough Girl podcast. That's how we grow it. You know, I don't have extra money available to do the extra marketing and all of the rest of the things that cost money. It's word of mouth that grows the Tough Girl podcast. It's you sharing it. It's you telling friends about it. It's you writing reviews. It makes a world of difference. It's also me banging the drum, sharing my life on social media to encourage people hopefully to watch my challenges, and then they might get interested in what I'm doing, and then suddenly like, oh, what's this Tough Girl Challenges? Whoa, then go on the website and then they start scrolling through. It's like, oh my God, there's so many stories. Yes, there are so many stories, and I have broken them down into different sections. So mountaineers, climbers, ultra runners, thru-hiking, world travelers, sailors, skiers and snowboarders, adaptive athletes, wheelchair adventurers, scientists and researchers, polar explorers, ocean rowers. There are so many women doing adventures and challenges. It's just so inspiring. And thank you for being one of them. Thank you for having a goal. Thank you for getting after it. Thank you for dreaming big. Thank you for pursuing your dreams. Thank you for believing that you are enough, because you are enough. Oh, I'm going on a rant now. But I'm going to end with how I normally end, and you can join in with this as well. But all that's left for me to say is, wherever you are, whatever you are doing, give it your all. Give it 110%. Get after it. Go for it. Believe in yourself, because I believe in you. Take care. Lots of love, and I'll speak to you soon. Bye.